Hi there, welcome. This is the Kelly's Astrology podcast, where you can find insight, guidance, and understanding through astrology. I'm Kelly, and I'll be your host. Hey there, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Kelly's Astrology podcast. I'm excited to be back with you all today. We're going to take a look at a featured astrology event that is happening in the week starting March 16. And what I'm actually going to be taking a look at is the Venus conjunct Saturn aspect. Now, that is a pretty unique kind of aspect. It has lots of technical and symbolic meaning. So I want to take you through some of those pieces today. Venus will conjunct Saturn on the 21st or 22nd of March, depending on whereabouts in the world you are. Now, this third week of March also sees the sun move into the sign of Aries. That'll happen on the 19th if you're in Canada and the US, or the 20th if you're in places like the UK, Europe, or Australia. The sun coming into Aries is the equinox, and this historically has been a marker of the new year. It is a time astrologically of renewal and rebirth. So this next 4 weeks with the sun in Aries are kind of colloquially referred to as hashtag Aries season these days. This is a time where passions can stir your heart and new motivation, especially around new projects, challenges, or tasks that you want to take on, that can emerge as well. So the sun in Aries is a fire placement. It's very much about taking action, getting things done. It's also full of courage. So it's sort of the desire to want to do things, but the energy and the confidence and the courage to make things happen as well. So during that 4 weeks of the sun in Aries, that'll start March 19th or 20th, depending on where you are, and run until around the 20th, 21st of April. This is going to be a time when you're more active, more confident. You might be generally feeling more bold and expressive yourself. The sun in Aries is an exalted placement for the sun, so it's very vitalizing. And so it can help point to ways to recover that vital life force or energy within. The sun in Aries is especially interested in beginnings and in getting things moving. So it's definitely a time to do rather than to think or plan or dream. So that's a shift that you'll also notice around March 19 or 20th in the week ahead. Before I dive into all of that juicy info on Venus conjunct Saturn in the sign of Pisces, I wanted to share a little about a special opportunity to study some new astrology material with me. For the first time online, I'm going to be teaching about 2 ancient timing techniques, minor periods and ascensional times. These are some of the most accessible timing tools used by ancient astrologers. And so if you're an intermediate or an advanced astrology student and you'd like to deepen your predictive astrology skills, I hope you can join me. I'll be teaching these techniques inside an intimate group mentoring practicum, which starts on March 27th. I'm going to include the sign up link below. These practicums are a mix of learning and practical application plus time for Q&A. So it's a little different from an intensive training course. You'll get lots of hands-on opportunity to work with these techniques in your own chart. So if you're wanting to learn about some of those ancient timing techniques, minor periods, and ascensional times, I hope to see you in group starting on the 27th. So let's turn our attention now back to Venus. So Venus is the planet that has been studied almost as long as the sun and moon. So after the sun and the moon, Venus is the third brightest light that we have in our sky. And there are records tracking her cycle and the unique features of what Venus does in the sky going back a very, very long time to the Babylonians. Venus is the planet of pleasure and of love. Venus is about women and about art and about beauty and about enjoyment. Really think about Venus as the planet that is able to bring ease into your life, sweetness to help smooth things over. And of course, since ancient times, Venus is also the planet that astrologers have looked to when exploring matters of love, relationship, and marriage. In your own birth chart, wherever Venus is, what sign, what house, what aspects she might be involved in. This can tell you a little bit about where and how you can find ease in life. It can also describe a little bit about the kinds of activities that you might enjoy from a leisure or a relaxation perspective. Venus has recently moved into the sign of Pisces, which is a great sign for Venus. This is the sign of Venus's exaltation. Venus will be in Pisces and in this exalted place from March 11th to April 4th. And just that word exaltation, being kind of lifted up or raised up or held on high, is a clue to what we get from a planet or the kind of vibe a planet is giving off when it's in its exaltation sign. So Venus in Pisces is particularly nourishing, very focused on connection and really inspiring the heart, the imagination, the soul while Venus is in Pisces. Now, we do get Venus in Pisces every year. This is one of our regular transits that Venus makes. The exact dates that Venus is in Pisces will differ from year to year. So this year, 2024, it's March 11th to April 4. Normally, you would hear lots of astrologers talking about many auspicious things when Venus is in Pisces. So each year with this Venus in Pisces period is usually an incredibly auspicious time for all kinds of Venus things. So it can be auspicious for things like love and friendship and enjoyment and ease, and even just generally good for women as a theme. When a planet is in this exaltation sign, and just as a quick sidebar, each of those 7 visible original planets has one sign where it has this exaltation designation. So when a planet is in their exaltation sign, they can activate benefits to do with being held in high esteem, like being well respected. And they can also bring benefits to do with things like honors and recognition, sort of acknowledgement that is somewhat public in nature for, a good thing you've done or good character or good deeds, those kinds of things. And so while this auspicious energy does apply to Venus in Pisces this year, there is a contrasting influence that we do have to take into consideration, and that is Saturn in Pisces. So Venus in Pisces this year, she's not in Pisces alone. She is kind of soaking in the adoration and trying to give that off, but having to negotiate the things that Saturn demands at the same time. So Venus in Pisces in 2024 isn't quite as full as Venus in Pisces typically is because of that extra flavor that's quite different that Saturn in Pisces is bringing. Now, Venus and Saturn meet every year, usually in different zodiac signs, depending on what zodiac sign Saturn is transiting through. For instance, the last time that Venus was conjunct Saturn, it was January of 2023, and Venus and Saturn were together in the sign of Aquarius. And then we've come to March of 2024, a little over a year later, and we've got Venus and Saturn in Pisces. Looking forward from here, we're looking at January of 2025, a little bit less than a year, and we'll have Venus and Saturn again meeting in Pisces. After that, Saturn is going to move into Aries. That happens towards the middle of 2025. And then the next 2 meetings of Venus and Saturn will be in Aries. One of those will be in March of 2026, and the other one will be in May of 2027. Those meetings are likely to be a little bit more difficult for Venus because she is in the sign of her detriment in Aries, and that's going to be more tricky for her, but that's a couple of years away. So let's keep our attention on Venus and Saturn in Pisces for now. So as you can see, just by thinking about those dates, sometimes Venus and Saturn will meet a little bit less than a year. Sometimes their meeting is a little bit more than a year apart. And that really has to do with the retrograde cycle of Venus. But safe to say, every year at some point, Venus does meet Saturn. So just to give you that context that we're talking about an energy that's really important around the 21st, 22nd of March, but we have had that before back in January of 2023, and we're going to have it again in January of 2025. So a Venus conjunct Saturn aspect, this is a limiting or a restraining aspect for Venus. So instead of being able to go all in on fun and pleasure and play and connection, which is what Venus in Pisces would love to do, Venus has got duties or commitments or work that she's being held to be accountable for. So Venus with Saturn is sort of as saying work and duty and commitment might have to come first before we get to the sweetness in life, which is what Venus is really trying to amplify. So Saturn's themes, whether it's about boundaries or work, that can mean that enjoyment or pleasure might be delayed, it might be scaled down, it might be muted, or that you might find yourself having to put duty first before you can do the fun stuff. It might generally describe this feeling of being really pressured or really time poor, maybe spread too thin. These are all themes that come up under big Saturn aspects. And sometimes there's some messaging in this around recognizing what we can and can't do, or what a reasonable amount of tasks or output might be in any given chunk of time. And so around March 21st and 22nd, as Venus is kind of uniting with Saturn in Pisces, these are some of the themes that you might be grappling with. You might be realizing you're not going to make a deadline because you've completely overcommitted. You might be realizing you have to delay that fun thing that you wanted to do because there is a commitment that you made to a friend or a family member, or there's a work obligation that has to be done and has to be done now. So this Venus conjunct Saturn aspect can describe this feeling of extra pressure, sometimes even feeling weighed down by your regular responsibilities, as if keeping up with your usual obligations is taking more out of you. It can be about worry or this heavy sense, this melancholy concern of it's not going to work out, it's never going to be okay. Some of that sort of more pessimistic thinking, Venus is perhaps picking up on with that cautious energy of Saturn. Because with Venus connected to Saturn, there is a caution, there's a hesitation, there's a desire to consolidate, there's this recognition that I might need to get back on track in some capacity. Now, you might notice this in a relationship, a romantic relationship, a friendship, a family dynamic. It might be that you're finding it harder to make time for self-care or for quality connections with loved ones because it seems your time is so taken up by all of these extra things. Saturn is a planet about time, and because Venus is about relationships, when Venus and Saturn come together, we're often reflecting on or grappling with matters pertaining to time and energy in relationship. Do I have enough time? Am I giving quality to this person or this partnership? Have I, got too many different friendships or different group connections going on? So we really want to think about that relationship for each of us between time and people and partnership, and how are we managing that? With Venus conjunct Saturn, it may be that recognition that there's something we're not on top of as much as we'd like to be, and we're going to have to figure out how to do better. Sometimes taking responsibility is really appropriate in a Venus-Saturn aspect. When Venus is involved with Saturn, what's necessary or essential might be highlighted. This can be clarifying, it can bring a realization or a deep sense of, oh, I can't keep neglecting X, Y, or Z. And it may be that those necessary or essential matters have to come before the fun stuff, before the enjoyment, before the pleasure. Very simply, this is sort of work before fun, Venus conjunct Saturn. So even though Venus is in this great sign condition, exalted in Pisces, your aspirations and your dreams about delight might be delayed, or it may be that things require a lot more effort or planning than you have expected or than they typically do. Matters relating to women might be in focus as well. Venus, of course, is one of our main planets to do with matters relating to women, female experience, feminine experience. And it may be that the reality of rules or regulations might become clear, things to do with, the pay gap, the gender pay gap and things like that, where women just come up short by so many different measures in terms of opportunity, financial stability, things like that. And it may be that we're not necessarily fixing everything with this Venus Saturn, but we're getting a real sense of the consequences of these limitations. I also wonder about how this particular Venus conjunct Saturn aspect might bring some clarity. So each of us has this really special opportunity under this aspect to really deeply, clearly see who or what is really important to you. Whenever there is a strong Saturn influence like this on relationships, I really think about this sort of pruning energy in the garden. Specifically, I think about pruning the rose bushes because it's something I watched my dad do a lot as a kid. And that Saturn, well, the pruning energy, I should say, is a very Saturnian thing. The cutting back, the paring back. When you're pruning your roses, you're allowing all the energy to concentrate in the rootstock through the winter and to allow for more lush growth the coming season. And so when we're in a Venus Saturn aspect, like we are this week, there's this pruning energy that we each need to hopefully consciously participate in, but we might be in it without being aware of it. And that's the idea of paring back, maybe getting rid of some of these extra acquaintances or superficial things or just draining commitments so that you can consolidate your energy around whatever the root stock is for you, whatever that core is for you, so that you can pare back and you can rededicate yourself to the people and the partnerships that matter most, but also to the practices and the daily rituals that help you stay grounded, that help you find calm, in this very chaotic world that we're living in. That simplicity and that regular routine and dedication and ritual is something that this Venus Saturn can help call you back to. It might also help you create some necessary distance from any draining or unequal connections. And so, with that Venus Saturn, it's a great time to reevaluate all of the people and all of the projects that you've got going on, just to see where you've maybe overextended and what or who you want to make the center and the priority, and then to negotiate your way out of other things that aren't that centering, rootstock place. One other simple way to think about that is Venus with Saturn really highlights the theme of quality rather than quantity. And so we're thinking about the most supportive people or partnerships, or the most enjoyable and satisfying projects and commitments. And then we're thinking about making those the only things we're doing so that there's less, but the quality is better. So Venus with Saturn may help bring a real clarity around the quality that you want to have in your life. And then that can let you know where we want to do that pruning. So, this is, of course, an energy that can play out in a little bit of an individual way for each of us. It can also play out collectively. And I would definitely keep an eye on headlines featuring, problems or concerns relating to women as a bit of a focus around the 21st or 22nd. It may be that there's a particular woman who is in the spotlight, that there's a lot of discussion around. There's this real sense of, the feminine energy and challenges pertaining to that with Venus conjunct Saturn. If you're thinking, how could I get even more specific in my own personal chart? You could consider an increase in awareness around maybe some challenges or limitations relating to the topics of the Pisces house, the Pisces part of your chart, which is, of course, where Venus will meet Saturn. But don't forget the topics of the Taurus and Libra parts of your chart as well. They are ruled by Venus and they will be influenced by this Venus-Saturn conjunction. And it could be in each of those three areas of life, your Pisces part of life, your Taurus part of life, and your Libra part of life, that you're thinking about consolidation, pruning back, simplifying, or maybe where you're dealing with that idea of duty before fun. Based on the inherent aspect relationships between the zodiac signs, I think this particular Venus conjunct Saturn aspect seems like it will most affect the Pisces and the Taurus parts of your chart. And that's because there's a sextile relationship between those two signs. And the conjunction is in Pisces, where Venus is both ruling but also seeing or witnessing by sign-based aspect the Taurus part of your chart. It's a little bit technical, but for some of you who are at that level, that'll be helpful. And so you may find yourself wanting to do things, but being blocked or delayed by practical constraints or deadlines, or I've got to do this load of laundry because we're so behind, so I can't come and do this fun activity. It's just a very basic understanding. So even though it might be a little challenging or frustrating, that feeling of like limits, oh, I can't, I have to say no. With this Venus conjunct Saturn aspect, it may bring a deeper understanding about that gap between real desire and feeling, which can be positive, and the realities of what can or can't happen, which can be a little bit more disappointing or frustrating, where you are noticing those limits. It can be a little bit like wanting to see a friend or family member or wanting to go and have this enjoyable experience, but simply not being able to due to constraints like time or distance or finances. For me, sometimes these kinds of aspects, I really feel the distance from my family, like, I can't just pop over and have dinner at the weekend, for instance. And that's just a practical reality of the fact that we live in different countries and there's a gigantic ocean between us. And so I know I'll just sit with some of that emotion around that. Lots of emotion. It is Venus, Saturn in a water sign. So processing those feelings where we're noticing those restrictions and limitations. It's certainly going to be a chance for all of us to practice being more clear about what we can and can't do, where that edge or that limit might be for each of us, and really to see what happens when we express that clarity to others. I was reminded of a phrase, a very simple phrase of Brené Brown's about how clear is kind. And even though being clear can sometimes feel hard, I do think it might be the kindest way under an aspect like this for the week ahead. So I wish you all the very best. I give you all a big hug in this kind of tender aspect that we are navigating. Feel free to let me know in the comments below what you're working through with this Venus Saturn aspect. I'll be back to share more, of course, next week. Until then, everyone, take care.